Today on Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, we're joined by D.H. Morris, author, playwright, world traveler, and the creative mind behind The Girl of Many Crowns. Her work brings forgotten history to life with depth, detail, and heart. We'll explore her journey, the inspirations behind her writing, and the timeless lessons hidden in the past.
So my emotional connection was feeling compassion for this 12-year-old girl and being in awe of the journey, the emotional journey that took her to a place where she could stand up to her father and say, yes, I will live imprisoned for the rest of my life rather than submit to a third marriage to someone I don't love.
Pull up a chair. It's story time with today's guest, D.H. Morris.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thank you for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. As you heard in the intro, our guest today is author Deborah Morris, who writes as D.H. Morris. Deborah, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much, Mel, for having me. I'm really delighted to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Your debut novel is called The Girl of Many Crowns, and it weaves rich historical detail with a deeply personal connection. How did your genealogical research spark the creative journey behind it?
Well, when my husband and I married many years ago, my aunt, who was the family genealogist, gave us a book of genealogy. And in it was a family tree. And several of the lines went back more than 1,000 years. And I was intrigued by that. I had heard as a child that there were lines that went back to royalty. But one in particular bothered me because it showed a 12-year-old girl, Princess Judith, being married to a 50-year-old King of Wessex. And then 2 years later, it shows her being married to his son, who is 24. And then 3 years after that, it shows her being married to a knight, the Count of Flanders. And I'm thinking, this can't be the same person, there's a mistake on our genealogy. I need to fix this. So I started delving into the problem, hoping to fix it and hoping to figure out who she really married, and found that it was just a very fascinating story. And it was at a critical time in European history when the borders were not completely set. They were battling over territory. They were being beset by Vikings. And the more and more I found out about what was going on, in about 7 years, I realized these were years that shaped Europe as we know it. It was being born in these 7 years. And if things had turned out differently, the events in the book had turned out differently, the Europe that we know would not exist. And so I just found it fascinating, wanted to share it with my family first, and wrote it as just a history with all kinds of footnotes and references. And then I realized that if I wanted other people to read it, including my family, because for them it was a bit heavy, I needed to make it sound more novel-like. So I went back and removed every historical fact that was absolutely not essential to the story. And lightened up the dialogue a little. And so it became more of historical fiction, although I will say that every single event in there happened, and I'm dramatizing those events.
That's really fascinating. Really fascinating. I'm looking forward to reading it. As I told you before we started recording, you sent me the book, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet because I was actually researching you to make sure I'm prepared for the questions today. But maybe after I finish reading it, I'll have more details, and we can kind of have you back and we can delve into it even deeper.
Love to.
So before we get into the specifics of the books, I want to ask you sort of an abstract question. So if you can invite any 3 historical figures to dinner, whether they be scholars, kings, or even your own characters, who would you choose and what would you serve them for dinner?
Well, with some reservation, I would invite one of the characters from my book, either Judith or Baldwin Ironarm. Baldwin was not written about as much because he was not royal. And basically, most of the records covered the royal. We had sparse facts about him. We knew he was the companion to Judith's brother, Louis. So I placed him in all the events that Louis was in because he was the companion. We know that he was a great Viking fighter, and that he was one of the few who actually had success against the Vikings, but also the Vikings respected him enough that they kind of offered to let him take refuge with them when he goes on the run with Judith. And so I had to fill in a lot with him that I would love to find out what did actually happen here. I would love to meet Shakespeare. I love his works. I've always loved his works. I'm fascinated by the storyteller he is, and I would love to meet him. I'd love to meet Abraham Lincoln. I mean, I've got lots of historical people I'd like to meet, but those are 3.
All right, so what would you serve them? What meal?
What kind of meal? Ooh, that's the good question. I love to cook. I'm kind of a foodie, but I also love a lot of foreign foods, mainly because I've lived in a lot of different countries and I've kind of developed a taste for different foods. It would be difficult for me to choose. And I don't know what their tastes would be. That's definitely and they all came from different time periods and from different places and probably wouldn't even know what food I was offering. I think the safest thing might be to just serve pizza. Maybe they all like pizza.
The idea of Shakespeare eating pizza.
And Abraham Lincoln eating pizza.
I could see that in my head. I can see that. That doesn't seem as far-fetched as Shakespeare eating pizza. That's a story that I may have to flesh out on my own. You originally studied theater, choral music education, English, and even law.
Yes.
So how do these diverse disciplines, how have they influenced your historical fiction writing?
That's an interesting question. Well, the writing part of it, I see when I'm writing, I actually envision the scene before I write it. So I try to envision it almost like in movie fashion. So I see it come to life, and then I try to bring it to life with words. I've always been an avid reader, very eclectic reader. So that English part of it, the study of literature and writing came naturally to me. And when I was a graduate student, I taught writing 101 as a TA to the freshman students, and I enjoyed it. So that part was great. Law, that, and interestingly enough, there are several parts in the book where law becomes an issue. And so that actually was very helpful there when they make legal arguments to the Pope. Judith and Baldwin, they're standing there trying to make their arguments because they're basically on trial and going up against King Charles's legal representative. There are also a couple of other scenes in the book where King Athelwulf, Judith's first husband, is being challenged for his kingdom by his son, Athelbald. And he actually has to make his legal arguments. They both do before the council in Wessex. So that was really helpful to me. Just listening to legal arguments, having to have made them myself, and as a clerk for a federal judge, analyzing those. So, yeah, it was all of it. I think all of the knowledge that we pick up in this life is useful in some way, and we find a way to use it, especially as a writer.
That's awesome. So you've lived across 4 continents. How has your global perspective shaped the way you portray history in your narratives?
I would say I see us all as being more alike than not. I see people as brothers and sisters and joined by our same desires and needs. And so some people say, well, how would you even know what a person feels like or thinks like in 9th century? And I think people are people. They have loves, they have dislikes, they have jealousies, they have fears. And there's always been a lust for power. And there's always been those who have strived to be as honorable as they possibly could, and protectors. And I don't think that's changed over the centuries, nor do I think it will change. And it's across continents, and you have people you love on every continent, and from every walk of life, and people you may not get along so well with. It really does have nothing to do with culture or color or nationality. It's something spirit to spirit that speaks, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yes. You describe your storytelling style as richly detailed and ethically crafted. Could you explain what ethically crafted stories means to you?
For me, the ethically crafting part of it is I tried so very hard not to make up anything I didn't have to. So I felt that if I did my due diligence in researching every single resource available on a certain topic, and I had so many topics to research because I didn't know anything in the beginning about the 9th century. So it's extra work on my part, but I have to feel good about what I put on the page. Maybe I'm wrong, but not because I just was lazy or because I didn't care. I have to do my due diligence before I can bring history to life so that those who read it can at least rely on the fact that I'm bringing you my best efforts of being accurate in even the finest little details.
That makes perfect sense. And I appreciate that. So you're planning a prequel to The Girl of Many Crowns.
I am.
What new characters or historical themes are you most excited to explore next?
Well, the reason, the prequel will be about Judith's grandmother. Judith was named for her grandmother. So this is Empress Judith. The monks kept the annals generally in this time of our world's history. Every year they'd kind of write a little blurb with all the summaries of all the big events that happened that year. But almost never do they write about women, unless the women do something outrageous in their opinion or unusual. And they wrote about Judith, and they wrote about her grandmother.
Wow.
Her grandmother was about 20-ish, and she married Louis the Pious, who was the son of Charlemagne. Charlemagne had this vast empire that covered the majority of what we know today as Europe. And he was married, but his wife died, and he had 3 grown sons. And he was considering dividing up the empire that he had inherited from his father Charlemagne, and maybe retiring to a monastery. He was very religious, and his counselors were not pleased with that. I think, in my opinion, it was a political thing, and there was some jostling amongst themselves because some had allied themselves with one son or the other. And they were concerned about that power struggle that might happen with the division of the kingdom. So they convinced Louis to marry again, and they convinced him to allow them to have a bride show. And they invited all the nobles of the empire who had eligible daughters to bring their daughters to the palace at Aix-la-Chapelle in Aachen and basically display them for the emperor's choice. And Louis was in his 40s at the time. So, he was still young enough that he could easily marry again. And he selected Judith for her intelligence, her beauty, and her musical ability. So it starts out like a Cinderella story. And then when she gives birth to her first child, tensions rise in the court because, oh my goodness, what are we going to do if there's another son? He's going to want part of this. But she has a girl, so tensions subside a bit. But then they realize she can have children. Okay, she's not barren, so we're not out of the woods yet. And then she does have a son, Charles. That sparks a civil war. And the sons rebel against their father, and they lock up Judith, and they lock up their father, and they lock up the baby Charles. And Judith has to battle not only for the life of her son, but also for his inheritance and his part of the kingdom. And so that's the story that the prequel will cover. And it will also kind of set up for the book, because when the book, The Girl of Many Crowns, begins, Charles is still being threatened by his older half-brother, Louis the German, who is still trying to take part of his kingdom, or take his kingdom, I should say.
Yeah, names then certainly were interesting. It would have been so much more clear, less insulting to have a last name, but like the German or the bald or the redhead or whatever they may have called them. Those
and in truth, most of those names were given to them by historians years later, because there were so many Louis and so many Charleses that they had to come up with a way to distinguish them. Charles the Bald was probably never called Charles the Bald during his life. And
I hope not to his face. I hope he wasn't called that to his face.
He probably wasn't even bald.
But history says so. So
well, there are several theories as to why he's called Charles the Bald. The one or two little pictures we have from that period don't show him as being bald, but one of them, he's got a helmet on. So how do you tell? And one of them, his hair is more like the Franks like to wear it more to their shoulders for the men. And they saw that almost as a sign of manliness. And so there's one theory that when the Pope came to dedicate one of his cathedrals, he was very pious as well, just like his father was. He was so humbled by the fact that the Pope came to do this for him that he cut his hair. And so who knows? Could
That be where the name Baldwin
could that
comes
be
from?
where the name came from? And one of his jesters, the jesters then made fun even of the kings if the kings were up for it. And apparently Charles the Bald was. And he made up a little poem that in one part of the poem, it does say Charles the Bald or the Bald Charles or whatever. And it could be that he was referring to that or something else. Or maybe he had too much hair and he was saying he was bald as a joke. But in any case, King Charles gets the epithet Charles the Bald from historians.
That's interesting. So what moment in writing your novel brought you the deepest emotional connection to your characters?
I think what probably haunted me through the years and finally caused me to write it, I kept thinking, I hope somebody writes this story someday because her story needs to be told, was this 12-year-old girl being married, doing her duty. And she says, in one account that I read, it said, Judith said that her first husband always treated her like a daughter, and she loved him for that. She loved him like a father. Her second husband, we don't know completely, but we do know that he tried to steal his father's kingdom. He would not let his father and Judith even come into his part of the kingdom when the kingdom is divided. So she had no contact with him. And all she knew about him was when she got to England, he was trying to steal her husband's kingdom from him and was not very nice. And then all of a sudden she's married off to him. And then, sorry.
That's okay.
She finds from that experience somehow the strength to stand up to her father, the king, and say, I've decided never to marry again unless it's my choice. At the age of 16, 17, when she's been widowed twice.
I was going to ask what happened to her other husband. So she's still a teenager. She's married for the third time. She's a widow 2 times over.
And her father offers or wants her to be available for a marriage. And if he finds another political alliance he wants. And she says, no, I'm not going to do it again. 2 times was enough. So in my mind, what would make her, the dutiful daughter, decide, no, I'm not going to do it again? And that was a big deal to say no to the king. And it must have been that second marriage was not a good one, and he did not treat her well. In fact, some of the accounts I read, they said that even though her second husband had only been king for a couple of years, really, few years, maybe 3 years total, he was, or 3 or 4 maybe, by the time, if you consider when her first husband was still alive. At the end of that period of time, his part of the kingdom had started to slide downward, deteriorate in morals. It was becoming a little debauched. It was becoming a little corrupt, all of this. So I use that also as an indication of probably starts from the top. Usually these things do. And Oh, I feel bad because I'm probably not even answering the question you asked.
That's okay. That's okay. It was about the emotional connection with the character.
So my emotional connection was feeling compassion for this 12-year-old girl and being in awe of the journey, the emotional journey that took her to a place where she could stand up to her father and say, yes, I will live imprisoned for the rest of my life rather than submit to a third marriage to someone I don't love.
That makes perfect sense. So your novel focuses on, as you just mentioned, Judith, who's a woman defying societal expectations. So how do themes of autonomy and resilience inform your broader view of history and storytelling?
Yeah. There are two parallel journeys that for the first 2/3 of the book. We follow Judith as she marries and goes to Wessex. We also follow Baldwin Ironarm, who comes and becomes into service with King Charles and becomes the companion of his son, Louis. And he fights Vikings. He has to foil some assassination plots. He's involved in everything, all kinds of things that are happening in France at the time, or Francia at the time. Judith is in Wessex, so we see what's going on both sides of the channel. For the first 2/3 of the book, the last third is their story as they join together and they work together to help her escape from the palace.
All right. So what parallels are there between the past and today that you hope readers will recognize in your book?
The parallels I see, it's very interesting to me that, for one thing, women were fighting for recognition and for independence. I think they've pretty much achieved that, but there's still some question. But I see that the bigger thing is within Francia. Francia was in a very dangerous period of time. It was being threatened to be overrun by outside forces. And I see our own country as being in that same situation. We have North Korea, we have China, we have Russia, we have Iran, who really don't care for us and would be glad to do us harm if they could. Then they have turmoil from within. And we are a very divided country, and they were too. And it was so difficult to finally get them united in any way because some wanted their worldview. They wanted things to be run the way they wanted, and the others had an opposite view. So there were the inner struggles. They had rebel lords. King Charles has the rebel lords who are trying to break his kingdom. And then they had invaders, Vikings. Some people might say that we have had some people cross our borders as well who don't mean us well. Not all of them, but certainly even a small portion of the number who have come across, if they had bad intentions for our country, could wreak havoc in our nation. And the Vikings were doing that in the 9th century Francia. And they were kind of trying to come up with ideas on how can we keep them from coming into our borders. Eventually, they come up with something that kind of works, but it takes them most of the book to do that. Of course, it only covers 7 years, but in 7 years, those Vikings did terrible damage. I think those are some of the parallels that I see. Also, what damage can be done to a person's reputation. I see that through a lot of our society. There's people complaining about each other, and instead of looking for good, spreading bad rumors about people, and maybe even lying and testifying in court against people, and not telling the truth, trying to destroy people. And I think our country really would benefit from more truth, more kindness, and more love for each other. Rather than trying to look for the bad, try to look for the good. Try to look for ways we can come together, not be divided. And I mean, even in my own family, we have different political views, but we can love each other still. We can respect each other still. And I hope that's a message that will resonate with people.
Okay, that sounds like a good message to spread. So 10% of your net proceeds support Our Rescue. How do you see storytelling and social activism intertwining in your work?
Well, again, I go back to my compassion for the 12-year-old girl. It's very sad to have children used as adults for any purpose, I think, whether it's in work factories or whether it's in as sexual objects or even political objects as it was in the 9th century. It's very sad. I really would love to see more people join together and raise their voice against using children in that way.
And what does OUR stand for? OUR.
What is what?
What does it stand for? OUR?
Oh, it's... So that organization was the basis of a movie that came out about 3 or 4 years ago called Sound of Freedom. And it was about trafficking of children. At that time, the organization used the name Underground Railroad for that. But now they changed it to just Our Rescue. And I think it's Operation Underground Railroad. So their goal was to kind of take inspiration from the Underground Railroad that was started to help slaves escape terrible persecution in the earlier part around the Civil War part of our nation, and take that inspiration and run with it for children.
That makes sense. So you grew up in San Diego and you now reside in Kansas City. Mm-hmm. How have those environments shaped your perspectives on history and storytelling?
Well, that's interesting. Again, it's part of my journey. Different people, different cultures, basically. There is a little culture clash between San Diego, I guess, and Kansas City. When I got to Kansas City, I had never lived in the Midwest before. And people at the store, workers, or at the bank, they call you honey or sweetheart. And you're going, wait, that's weird. And then I realized I like that. I like the fact that they are down to earth. They're loving everybody, and they're just trying to be good people. And so when we arrived in Kansas City, I thought, I feel like it's home. It's wonderful. It has great barbecue, great people, and they're all down to earth. But that doesn't mean I didn't love San Diego as well. I have found in every place that I've lived, from Egypt to Japan to Europe, it's just like the food. You find food that you love there, and you find people you love there. It's a wonderful world, beautiful world. Nice. Every place. I feel like God has blessed every place in its own way.
That's awesome. So as a mother and a grandmother, how do your family roles influence the stories you tell? And do you tell the stories differently now that you have grandchildren than you did before?
I wrote the book originally hoping that my daughters and granddaughters would also be inspired as I was by the story of Judith and the strength that she gained as she grew and went through difficult times, and that they would know that very difficult times present us with a challenge. We can either grow from it, become stronger, or we can let them break us and make us feel victimized and worthless and helpless. And I wanted them to know that it's okay to turn to God in your struggles and also to find strength within yourself and to stand for what you believe in, even against all odds.
That's great. So what do you hope readers take away from The Girl of Many Crowns?
Well, for one thing, I hope they take away an appreciation of the 9th century that they haven't had before. It's not a period of time that is typically written about. When it is, quite often they're Viking books from the Viking perspective. And one of the most popular authors, I'm not going to say who, I read something he wrote and he said, I don't even pretend to be accurate historically. I just take a good story and I make up the characters and put them into history. And I've got a few elements of history that are historical, but don't look and don't hold me to what actually happened. And I thought, yeah, he's writing good stories and they're very popular. And I think that's great, but that wasn't me. And so I'm hoping if you love history, if you want to learn what really happened during those years and what shaped and formed Europe, that you will get that out of the book, see what a precarious time it was, see that these people, even though it's typically been called the part of the Dark Ages historically, actually there was this brilliant little period of time in the Dark Ages in Europe called the Carolingian Renaissance. And it was started with Charlemagne, who really desired to have all the people in his kingdom educated. He started this movement, this great movement of culture and education. Now, it only got so far, didn't have the internet, didn't have printing press, much slower process. But at least he was making a start. It was carried on a certain amount by his son, Louis the Pious. And then we have Charles, King Charles, who desperately wants to spend his time doing that and pursuing education for his people. Unfortunately, he's caught up in a period of time where he's fighting for his life from all of these different forces. And at one point in the book, his main counselor, Hincmar, who I'd never heard of before until I started doing the research, Archbishop Hincmar, who was actually a very influential man of the 9th century, says to him, we have these 5 or 6 forces threatening our existence, and we're able to handle them one at a time. What happens? Do we have a plan? We need to have a plan. If everything happens at once, if all of them attack at once, and basically King Charles believes they will need a miracle, and they pray for a miracle. And in the book, they get a miracle. And I've thought, if everything fell apart, we had internal civil war, we had external wars, all at the same time, would our country also need a miracle and pray for a miracle? I hope that people will also get out of this book that loyalty and honor and goodness ultimately will prevail, and that you can still ask for those miracles in your life. And maybe you've seen them because we all go through difficult times, but there are always tender mercies there if we look for them.
That's a really optimistic perspective. We need more of that.
I think so too.
So, have you gotten any reader feedback that's made enough of an impact on you that it will influence the way you write the next book?
That's a good question. Really good question. Most everyone who is looking for historical, in fact, everyone, I would say 100% to this point, who's looking for historical fiction and loves history, loves the book. There are a few people who have picked up the book thinking it's a romance. And it has elements of romance in it. It has, this couple does come together and fights their battles together, but it's not a structured romance. And those are the only criticisms that I've received thus far, that there wasn't enough romance and it wasn't what they expected as far as that goes. So I will warn the readers, there is romance, in there, but it's not the main focus. The main focus is the history, the politics, the wars, the assassinations, the marriages for political reasons, and the growth that these characters experience in their characters. And then they come together, a powerful couple, as they have each grown from basically children into powerful young man and young woman.
All right. So if there are any aspiring historical fiction writers out there, what advice would you give them about bringing historical worlds to life, both from an accuracy perspective and sort of a heart perspective?
I love research. I love that part of it. Sometimes it's hard for me to know when to stop. The research and the information is out there, even for the 9th century, but it may take digging. I guess you have to decide on whether you want to bring real characters and real events to life. And if you do, you can also find wonderful stories in your own history. You don't have to be a royal like these characters are to go through these very dramatic circumstances and to inspire people. Look, as I was doing my research, I found so many stories. I thought, oh, wow, somebody should write that. It's not me, but somebody should write about this person. This is an amazing story. This is an amazing story. History's full of beautiful, amazing people in our past, and most of us don't even know about them, have never heard of them, because we recycle Superman 10 times, or we recycle, all the Marvel comics, and I've enjoyed those, Spider-Man and Superman, but we also have real heroes that our young men and women can use as models for their own life. And perhaps even more meaningful, because they don't have to have superpowers to become great heroes like these people. They're real. I think it's worth pursuing. And do your best, I think, in my opinion, to be as accurate as possible. And I think truth is as interesting, if not more so, than any story you could make up.
I agree 100%. So that was advice for potential historical future or historical authors. As a last question, one that I ask all of my guests, what general advice do you have for the listeners on any subject?
Love each other. Love is more important than almost anything we can learn to do. Look for the good in each other. Don't look for reasons to be offended or to hate somebody. And give each other grace. Nobody's perfect. And people, if you walk in their shoes, you can kind of see why they do what they do for the most part. I mean, there are some people who have truly become corrupted or evil to the point where they want to prey on others. Perhaps if we went back in their own history, we would see what brought them to that. But 99% of our population, there's a reason to love them for something that is good in them. And if you focus on that, you will be happier too in your life.
Well, that's a good way to wind up the conversation today. That's great. So our guest today has been author of The Girl of Many Crowns, D.H. Morris, Deborah Morris. Thank you for being here today. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Mel.
Please go to my website at podcastreallife.com for more information about my guest and a link to her book. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stories from Real Life. Don't forget to subscribe and share. Let's meet right here every Tuesday and Friday. See you then.